Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today we're going to meet with Kevin Stecko, who is the founder and president of 80stees.com. He's been operating this business since December of 1999, and we're going to have a little discussion about kind of where that came from, the passion for the brand, the passion for all things retro, and just kind of break down, the business, how he does things and how he keeps it running. So without further ado, Kevin, welcome to the podcast. Hey, Kevin, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on, and I'll tell you just up front, I am a customer and a fan of 80stees.com. So I wanted to have you on, and I want to spend the first couple minutes just kind of geeking out about kind of what you're doing and what your business is. I spent some time on your site looking through stuff just to kind of prepare for the podcast today. I got to tell you, I looked through your about page. I feel like we could have been best friends growing up. Between the Star Wars, the He-Man, the different things that you have on there, it's just super cool to see all that stuff. So tell me a little bit about your background and kind of where all that comes from.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on. I was born in 1977, and I guess a lot of my childhood sort of comes from, birth order. I was the third boy in my family, and the next oldest, or my middle brother, he's 5 years older than me. So I kind of was far enough away in age from my two brothers that I wasn't really in the mix with them in terms of being able to keep up with what they were doing or anything. And I guess the other thing that sort of affects it is that we didn't really have a lot of neighbors. We had one neighbor that had a kid that was a couple years older than me, but other than that, it wasn't like I could go outside and find a bunch of kids to play with or anything like that. So what the end result of that was that I spent a lot of time playing by myself with action figures, and my main action figure collection was He-Man. I had a ton of those guys. I also had some Transformers. The neighbor I spoke of, he actually had some G.I. Joe guys. And then I had another friend eventually that did some Thundercat stuff. But for me, it was He-Man and 90% He-Man, 10% Transformers. And, that was always really, really something that even as I outgrew it, put it this way, I sold my Transformers at a garage sale when I was 13 or 14, but I never sold the He-Man guys. It was just something that always in the back of my mind I had a lot of nostalgia for. And when I went to college, I actually walked by this little t-shirt shop, and I shouldn't even call it a t-shirt shop. It was more like a head shop / tapestry shop. It was just kind of this guy imported all kinds of stuff. One thing he sold, which I found out later, they were bootlegs, but were t-shirts. And I'd go by his window all the time to see what he had new, because it was all retro stuff. And he had a He-Man t-shirt, so of course I had to buy one. And that kind of set me off on the path to start this business, because I wore that shirt to an amusement park called Kennywood, which is near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And all these people asked me where I got it. And so that was kind of before you could find these things in Target and everything. And so basically the step goes childhood loving He-Man, nostalgia for it, buy it as a 20-year-old guy, and then have a bunch of people ask me about it, and had some free time after I graduated from college before my job started. So I just put up a little site and ran it on the side. And next thing you know, a couple years later, I was able to quit all full-time jobs and just work for myself.
I think what's cool about just your story, but I love it because it trends with my own background. I'm the youngest of three boys, and I was born in 75, so I'm a couple years older than you. But the way they marketed toys and the way they did things back then was so cool, because it was either supported by a cartoon, it was supported by a comic. So even as a kid, yeah, you had to come pack in a little bit of your own imagination, but they also supported you by giving you that. You knew what Cobra Commander's voice sounded like. They supported you with that content. And it was cool because if you had that creativity and could play alone and you could just have these adventures and do all these cool things, it was a great time. It was a great time to grow up. And I personally don't feel like the action figure cartoon game is nearly as good today as it was back then.
Yeah, I try not to fall in a trap of, everything that when I was a kid is better than it is today. If you go back and watch some of those cartoons, that can be kind of funny to watch. Oh boy, we were suckers. You could tell this is the cartoon introduction or the toy introduction of the week type of thing. But But yeah, I do agree though. Like we had, you know, the marketing was so closely tied to the merchandising that it was just fantastic. And I that was always a big thing for me. I remember specifically like something that was in the cartoon when it finally showed up in the toy aisle. Like that was like really exciting. Like I'll never forget Orko. Orko was not part of the action figure line for He-Man for quite a while. And when he finally showed up, he was too big. You know what I mean? Like the scale was all wrong and everything, but it was just like, wow, finally we get this character, and we definitely were merchandised too. And I mean, I'm not gonna say that they were more quality. Like I remember a few years back, I think it was like the 2010 Ninja Turtle cartoon series or whatever was on, and my son was just getting into watching it, and I mean, legitimately, it was a pretty good show. So I won't say like across the board.
Yeah, I think it's definitely evolved because, like you said, there was some very intentional brainwashing happening, but you didn't really care. Like, even though it was a safety lesson, you didn't care as long as it was delivered by Quick Kick or Snake Eyes or whatever it was, because you just got a few more seconds of that character.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember specifically like a couple times where they would try to throw educational content in, and to this day, I can still remember those things. So one of them was on GI Joe. They were fighting this like amorphous blob that just kept growing, and the way they killed it was by throwing apples into it because apple seeds, I think they have like some tiny amount of cyanide in them or something like that. So they literally like poisoned it with apples. And then there's an episode of He-Man where he needed to make glass, and or like someone was shooting a ray gun at him or something. He was in a desert, so he like literally like rubbed his hands really quickly on sand in the desert and turned it into glass. And so like from this day, that's how I know that apple seeds have cyanide in them, and sand was or glass comes from sand.
Right, right. I mean, how intentional that was at the time, who knows? But it's kind of cool that you remember that because there was a lot of that stuff. Education was a huge part of the culture back then.
Yeah, I think they had to throw that in there, right? It was like, not to be too cynical about it, but they had to have some redeeming value coming from the cartoons.
Right. So you'd mentioned because I remember having this mindset, whether I was 13, 14, whatever it was, I didn't know what bootlegs were, so it's not like I would have used this terminology. But I remember thinking, man, I wish they still sold X, Y, and Z. I wish I still had whatever shirt it was and it still fit me or whatever it was. How did you kind of navigate that at the beginning? Because there are a lot of bootlegs out there, and how do you kind of become the official provider of when you cover so much?
Right. So yeah. So I'll be honest. I was probably very similar to you when I first started in terms of not really understanding what is a bootleg shirt. And back when I started, it wasn't like print on demand was what it is today. Because right now anyone can bootleg anything, one off, one at a time, and it's super easy. But back then, you actually probably had to either silk screen or heat transfer, and if you're doing that, you're probably doing a larger quantity. So it turns out that there was one company that just didn't care, and they sold to like all these mom and pop shops, and they did bootleg stuff. But the way we've, over time, I learned it basically just came to me that these people were really unprofessional, and there's no way they're doing this in a way that is on the up and up. And so we had to start finding companies that did get licenses because I didn't even know how to obtain a license. Then so it was like, okay, I know there's companies that do this, so how can I find them? And my mother actually worked with me, and she found our first like legitimate supplier. And from there, it just kind of snowballed because once you know one of them, there's like sales reps, there's trade shows, and the first company sort of introduced me to the trade shows. That's where I found a sales rep, and once I went to that first trade show and had that sales rep, like I basically had access to the whole world of vendors that did this and would sell to us. And to this day, we still use. That's for the most part what we do. We do obtain some licenses. Like I have a direct deal with Hasbro. So GI Joe, Transformers, Gem and Holograms, My Little Pony, Mask, Visionaries, even like Dungeons and Dragons now, that we've really expanded our deal with them. But so like those we work with them directly. We pay them a royalty on our sales. They get full approval on all of our designs. So we'll submit a concept, and sometimes they'll be like, "Where is this art from?" Because they're worried that uh, you know that they would have to pay someone else for it, because back in the day they didn't lock down these deals that well. Like He-Man's a really good example. The Filmation cartoon, they actually owned the rights to all their creations. So that's why a lot of times you didn't see the action figures for some of those vehicles and characters, because Mattel didn't want to pay Filmation a cut of the sales. So you almost had like two diverging like things. You had the Filmation and then you had the toy line. But yeah, so that's we go and we find companies that sell or that get licenses for Disney, which now consists of Star Wars and Marvel, and obviously all the Disney movies and cartoons. Um, Mattel's obviously one that we do with He-Man. That's one of our big sellers, and movies. So for us to go get all those deals would be just impossible. It's really impossible for one company to do that. It's just too much to manage. So we almost act like a marketplace for a bunch of official suppliers.
I'll be honest. When I first found you guys, and I've probably been following you for probably 5 years, easy. But I was looking for. I don't know if I was looking for bootlegs, but I was looking for whatever I was looking for, whether it was a WWE shirt or some kind of a retro T-shirt. And I came across your guys' site, and I was just blown away with the depth, like just the amount of categories from 80s movies to cartoons to you name it. I was just blown away with the overall depth, and that's kind of what kept me coming back and kind of following it. And I was fascinated with the idea that you found a way to legitimize and provide those products back to people. So one of the things on my podcast I talk about, and it's kind of the source material, so to speak, is that I work with companies on remembering that feeling, right? So like why we love brands that we love and why we have that love for nostalgia is because it gave us a feeling of some sort. And that's what I really love about your brand is everything that you're pumping out. Not only do you probably have that feeling, but you're giving your customers that feeling. So what are your thoughts on kind of what the passion for retro and the passion for nostalgia, where does that come from, and why do you think it's resurging?
Yeah. Well, I think it's been resurging for. I don't even know if resurging is the right word anymore. It's just sort of like continued.
Right.
So yeah, like when I started, I kept thinking, I wonder how long I can sell T-shirts from the '80s. And I started 21 years ago now, and I think it's going to be forever. I'm not worried about my business sort of like having an end point where people are like, oh no, retro is no longer cool. So why is that? The kind of comments we get from people like whenever they subscribe or like we ask them, what did you like about us? Why did you buy from us? Type of thing. A frequent comment is that they just love to be reminded of their childhood. And it's funny because it doesn't necessarily have to have been a great childhood. Some people had, really, really not great childhoods, but they sort of disappeared into these action figures. That was their, safe space away from it. Some people had great childhoods and they remember playing He-Man with their dad or whatever, like you saw in the original cartoon for He-Man was actually like the original commercial for He-Man figures was like a guy playing with his son. And so I think that it's really just a better time that you can remember. And also, we were less cynical. It's not that there weren't problems in the world in 1982 or 1984, but we were protected from it, right? It doesn't do us any good to know that there's like a Cold War going on and that there's, eminent problems and political issues and whatever economic issues, all that. So we didn't experience any of that because there was no point in telling a 5-year-old about it because can't do anything about it. So we had, that innocence, um, and I think kids probably don't have that as much today. But I think that's a lot of it's just like the time and place where all you had to do, your only responsibility when you woke up was really to just stay out of your parents' hair. And a great way to do that was watch cartoons and play action figures.
Yeah, and I know it's all scalable and relative, but I felt like the toys were more affordable and more accessible too. I mean, because I remember doing little, whatever it was, I just knew I had to come up with $3 because that would get me a GI Joe guy. So whether it was I need you to wash my car, I need you to do it, whatever it was like 50 cents, 75 cents, $1.50. if I get to $3, I can get a new guy. And that's how I kind of hustled my way through my childhood, is knowing that these things were pretty affordable. I mean, you didn't have to drop 20, $30 on an action figure. It was just, they were minimal expense. And if you remember the KB Toys R Us days, you'd go in and man, there would be a massive wall of options. Regardless of whether you're into Thundercats or Transformers or whatever it was, like it just seemed like I mean, kid in a candy store and air quotes, but it just seemed like you had all the options in the world to kind of go after and feed that imagination.
Oh man, yeah, nothing better. I don't know if I have better memories of my childhood than walking down that toy aisle with with the He-Man focus, and then, I mean, it got to the point where it wasn't just one aisle dedicated to it, right? Like there's like one aisle of He-Man, one aisle of GI Joe, like just yeah, that that was fantastic. And it's funny that you mentioned the $3. So I literally talk to my mom about this all the time. I would try to so my grandmother would come to watch me sometimes, and we had department stores, since they've been crushed by Walmart. But one of them was called Murphy's Mart, and one of them was called Hills. And literally, I had this conversation with her, with my mother, a couple nights ago. I said, I could like if that store were to come back today, I could probably close my eyes and walk to the He-Man aisle like right now, just because I was taking everything in to the point where like I remember everything about that. I remember the arcade games and the little concession stand in the front of the place. Yeah, and so, but my grandmother would come watch me, and I would like always con her into taking me there because I knew once I got her in the aisle, she was gonna spend that $4, and and my parents gave me a $1 a month allowance when I was like, when I was 3 or 4 years old, and so it was like every 4 months, I knew I had one that I could buy myself. I didn't have to con anyone.
I see. I really got spoiled. I get a buck a week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, right. What's your grail item? You mentioned that store. I don't know if you've ever heard of Pomida. Have you ever heard of a Pomida? They're kind of a Kmart slash Hardware Hank mashup,
Okay.
and we had Pomidas in our area. And what was awesome about it is you could go to Kmart and kind of find the more recent stuff, but Pomida, because it was kind of a hardware store kind of a thing, I just don't think they did the same kind of kid slash toy traffic. So you could always find like a one generation ago type stuff. So when I was really getting into GI Joe, I came in kind of after the initial phase, so I didn't have Snake Eyes, I didn't have Storm Shadow, I didn't have the really sought after ones.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I'm like, I wonder if Pomida would have it. And I'm like strategizing, and sure enough, went to Pomida. They had them all. They had Alpine, Bazooka, like they had all the really kind of like a generation ago lineup
Yeah.
because they just didn't move the same kind of traffic. And I remember as a kid, it just blew my mind that I was able to get my hands on a sealed, in the package Storm Shadow. And I just remember that, like, I mean, it was probably one of the greatest days at that point in my life. I was like, "Oh my god, I've hit the jackpot." So, question: what's your Grail item? What's the one that like blew your mind as a kid?
Wow. It's funny because, like, looking back at it now, I totally didn't have any of the really good Transformers, and they were kind of expensive.
Yeah,
So I think that's what sort of kept me away from them. Like, I would get little ones for my birthday, or the coolest ones I had were the Dinobots and the Constructicons. So those are pretty good. But I think that Soundwave was always so. If there's one thing that I never had that I would have wanted as a kid, it was definitely like a Soundwave figure. I thought he was the best. My buddy had him, so when I go to his house, I get to play with him over there.
yeah, he was the best, not only in the cartoon, but his action figure actually kind of looked like the cartoon, where some of the other ones didn't sometimes, and that was
Yeah,
disappointing. But Soundwave was always super cool.
yeah, yeah. It's funny. I can't have any He-Man guys on that list because I sort of had everything, like until I got too old. Um, you know, they were still going a little bit. Like so, when I turned 10, that's when the He-Man movie came out, and like I remember specifically thinking like I'm probably too old for He-Man at this point. and I wasn't really as into it at that point. Um, so like even though I missed out on some of the characters and some of those like more sought after things, like the Eternia playset like was another one where like I can't say I really was gonna ask for it as a kid, because I was getting old, but I'd always look at that box and I'd be like, oh, that is pretty cool. You know, it's got the little like it had this like little monorail thing or whatever hanging from, not a monorail, but like it like I don't even know what you call it, almost like a ski lift type of thing that went around. Um, but yeah, definitely the Transformers. I think because of the price, it was always that issue where I'm not. I could buy one Soundwave or like two and a half He-Man guys.
Right.
So I always went with the He-Man guys.
Well, then you kind of got nervous too because you didn't necessarily because you were all in on one, and I'm like, if I pivot now, I'm so behind, and I don't know if I'll catch up because I was in the same era as you. So I was big into He Man, big into GI Joe. Always liked Transformers, but I started too late. So I had Grimlock, and I probably had 3, 4 of them, but I could never catch up. So I kind of knew that like I'm just not even going to try. I'm just going to focus on this. And then I had friends who had Transformers, so that I got to play with their stuff. But it was funny as a kid. Like you just saw these things as currency, you know?
No doubt.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your brand lovers, your followers. I got to imagine there is a massive amount of people with the kind of the endless genres you cover that are just crazy brand lovers for what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have some like some people that are they're just they're nuts for it. In terms of our typical customer doesn't exist. So it's really funny. We actually did some like marketing analysis on our orders, just to like orders and merchandise, just to try to understand a little bit more like what items get purchased together most frequently. And the thing that surprised me maybe more than anything was the lack of crossover among our best customers. So like our best customer, if let's say they've ordered 8 shirts in a year, like guaranteed 7 of them are from one license. Like you know what I mean? They're kind of like we were just talking about, right? They're like all in. So I mean that's kind of where we get like where we specialize in that. You know, we've got if you like Transformers, you literally can scroll and keep on expanding the selection on our Transformers page forever. Same thing with He-Man. So and that's where we sort of specialize. It's not the guy that just has like a fond memory of all these different things. Like these are hardcore fans, and they're not wearing them ironically. Like I used to get that a lot, and it kind of annoyed me. Like, oh yeah, you sell ironic T-shirts. And it's like, no, I really don't. Like, I mean, not that there's never a funny saying on some of our shirts or whatever, or that sometimes they're not put in like a current meme, you know, like the He-Man "Do you lift, bro?" or something like that. Like, so I mean, it's not like we don't have some of that stuff, but even that, it's not like making fun of He-Man at all. It's that's a guy that loves He-Man, and he's he just so happens to probably lift a lot of weights and looks kind of like He-Man now.
Right, right. I'm going to make an assumption here and tell me if you think I'm wrong. But like, I mean, you already have the foundation of people who love this stuff. You have the people who love nostalgia. You have the people who kind of been there, done that. I grew up with GI Joe, whatever it is. But I also think because I'm kind of this way, there's got to be a part of your customers too that are like you said, I'm going to buy 9 out of 10 because I don't want to experience that feeling of loss or the missed chance again, because that's how I am. If I'm getting into whether it's buying retro t-shirts or whatever, there's no next time. It's I got to do it right now because if I miss it, I might not see it again. Like that's a panic moment for guys who love stuff like this.
Yeah, that's funny. So we actually that's one thing that we've never really done is like try to like limit things artificially to to prevent or like to make people have that fear of missing out feeling. And a while back there was I mean they're still around, they're just not as prevalent, or maybe I just don't notice them as much, but there was like the tea a day sites. They were bootlegs, so they can't leave them up for longer than a day. That's basically why that business model started. It's like I can get away with stealing your intellectual property for one day because by the time you go to send me a cease and desist letter, like you can't even like call your lawyer and have them write a letter before the end of that day anyway, so no one even bothers. It's kind of a brilliant business model in that respect, I suppose. So if you don't mind stealing from other people, it works out pretty well. But so we don't really have too much of the fear of missing out in our stuff. Now licensing deals expire. So like for instance, right now, if our Hasbro license were to expire, all those products I talked about would be gone at the end of that period, and potentially gone forever. So there is a little bit of that, but I don't purposefully try to like manipulate people into buying the stuff like right now. I want them to have some comfort knowing that we're going to be around forever. That's my goal. We're going to be around, and we'll always have a selection. Every once in a while, a particular design might go away. But.
Right. I think it's great you don't do that. But I think as a customer and as somebody who's missed out, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it's just a part of me. Like when am I ever going to get that chance again? Who knows? I'm going to take the action now. Like I'm a collector of retro things anyway. I have some arcade games and I have some different things that I've come across in my life that I'm like, nope, I gotta have it. It just is. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So I just think it's interesting because in your genre and in the sheer category of options you offer, like there's just people that they love that stuff and they're not going to miss out.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. When a license expires, we do always get people asking us about the old products or whatever, and the big thing, a lot of times, like a license will expire because really it wasn't worth the guaranteed money anymore. We came out with we made a deal with Harmony Gold, who owns the U.S. rights to Robotech, and that came out of the gate like slamming, like it like overperformed for a couple years, and I signed an extension, and like year 3. It was like kind of done. And the reason why it came out of the gate slamming is because they hadn't signed any merch deals for so long. And then, we had that, pent up demand. But once we fulfilled that, it was kind of like, there's limited success we're experiencing with each successive product launch. So when it finally expired and we took all the stuff off the site after making an announcement, we get these letters like, oh, why do you not have Robotech anymore? And it's like, because you didn't buy it then. So to your point, yeah, if you want something, you definitely have to support it.
I think it's got a trend to it, the size of the bubble, because I mean, I remember Robotech, but Robotech's bubbles got to be about a quarter of the size of like Mask, and Mask is probably half the size of G.I. Joe, and G.I. Joe, it's got a trend with that because some of that stuff, I mean, not that it wasn't cool, but it just didn't blow up in the same way.
Right. It was way more obscure for sure.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I'm gonna let you go. I really appreciate you coming on here. The last thing I wanted to mention is just make sure your website is front and center. So 80stees.com. That's where you can find an amazing selection of stuff. And then also you guys created a promo code for us called Brand Retro 30, correct?
Yes, that's right. Let me I'll double check that as you're talking, but yes, I'm
if I remember correctly, it's 30% off the order.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. So anybody who's listening, go check this out. Cause like, if you remember any cartoons, TV, WWE, you name it, it's there. It covers gaming, sports, everything. It's an awesome site and they've got an amazing amount of stuff. So
yes, and I can verify that coupon code is active, and I'll leave it active for a couple weeks here after the podcast.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate you coming on.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Take care.
Stay connected by following us on social media. There you'll find a steady flow of information on CyberDogs, our customers, and the work that we do. Check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/CyberDogsMarketing, on Instagram at instagram.com/CyberDogsMarketing, or on Twitter at twitter.com/CyberDogsLTD.